3. The gunboat Jihun, Kizilkala, Oxus River Port, Afghan-Soviet border, July 21st. 30 years ago, Gaidadost the Uzbek had been a Soviet citizen, with the risk which went with it of being accused, as he was, of economic crimes against the state. He had owned 30 sheep for private profit. He could not have lived without the flock, for the administration at the cotton mill where he worked was corrupt. It recorded that he had been paid double what he actually received, but this was not stated at his trial. His sentence was 5 years in a heavy labor camp in western Siberia. When he was released, Gaidadost found that he had been allocated a job in the Karakum Desert Irrigation Project. He collected his ticket to the town of Kirki in Turkmenia, where the labor battalions were based, only 60 miles north of Afghanistan. The next weekend, instead of taking his Sunday rest, he started to walk southwards. 11 hours later, after climbing a mountain, swimming a river, evading the border guards and crossing a mine-sown strip of ploughed earth guarded by watchtowers, he was free, in Afghanistan. Now he lived near Kizilkala, and he had a flock again. But the Russians, 6 years later, seemed to have caught up with him. He shook his fist at the military convoy as it forced him and his 60 sheep off the broad tarmac of the northern road, covering him with dust, sending the animals into a field of lucerne from which they would have to be patiently retrieved. Death upon the spiritual teacher of your Lenin and Karl Marx! Defeat to the infidel! The splendidly turned-out Soviet officer in the lead car, a Russian Gaz-69 field vehicle like a light jeep, with the aircraft and parachute insignia of the elite Soviet airborne troops stenciled on the side, made an obscene gesture back and shouted an unrepeatable insult. Then he turned to his companion. Every little helps to stoke up the hostility, you know, Yusuf Azambai said to the Eagle, who sat beside him, newly promoted to paratroop colonel by courtesy of the wolves of Badakhshan. Yusuf was a colonel too now, thanks to Noor and Karima sitting up all night stitching stripes and stars and arm patches showing parachutes and aircraft, not forgetting hammers and sickles, on the field dress shirts acquired from the purgative flower transaction. Behind them rumbled an impressive line of Russian BTR-60 PK armoured personnel carriers, huge, boat-shaped amphibious ones. They had 8 wheels for land travel, and in their water-crossing role swam powered by water jets, driven by their rear twin engines. Now they breezed along at 50 miles an hour, filled with guerrillas wearing the proud khaki and blue of the USSR's airborne, the most admired of all Soviet formations. The splendid military highway had been built by the Afghan construction unit's engineers, using thousands of labourers from the Food for Work program. It would take them only half an hour now to reach the port, the gunboat, and the treasure. Major Han's intelligence work had paid rich dividends. In the 2 days' research time which he had asked of Adam, his organization had found out that the treasure was still at the Oxus port, already loaded onto the gunboat Jihun. His special duty group had acquired airborne insignia, 8 personnel carriers, a scout car, and a selection of top priority identification documents like those used by LRRGs, the long-range reconnaissance groups of the Soviet Army, and a fair knowledge of the way in which such units are run. Although originally formed to collect information, these units had been upgraded. Now they were designated as special formations, ready to carry out any task. Each group had 27 men, 6 of them officers and the rest sergeants. Self-sufficient and armed with sophisticated weaponry and communications equipment, they were regarded with awe by the rest of the army. Best of all, from the point of view of the guerrillas, they were seldom seen by the rest of the troops. If Adam and his men made mistakes of behavior or routine, most people, even Russian troops, were not likely to have standards of comparison. In the back of the half-ton scout car sat young Major Kasim. Beside him was Major Idries Shah, the Pagman group's host until this morning. Each of the personnel carriers contained 9 men, half its possible complement. Short on sky-blue paratrooper berets, helmets and jackboots, the Wolves had been unable to obtain enough of them in the time available. The Eagles' force had to make do with paratroop goggles. Each man had a gas mask. Those who did not speak Russian were to put one on at once if Russian troops or officials looked like questioning them, and display a standard army chemical decontamination sign. Each vehicle carried 3 small packing cases, whose markings, gelignit or gelignite, had been painted out. Carbolic disinfectant fluid splashed on the boxes masked the explosive's telltale smell of marzipan. The reconnaissance men considered the ship to be so heavily guarded that there was next to no chance of stealing the treasure. It would have to be blown up. And they had enough explosive to shatter the gold coins and scatter the pieces far and wide over the vast expanse of river, to be lost forever in its treacherous, swirling waters. Not for nothing was the Oxus styled the Insane River by the Arabs when their armies first encountered it. The sun was sinking beyond the distant Iranian border when the convoy reached the first of the roadblocks on the main road from Kunduz to Kizilkala port area. At the sight of the red and light blue pennant on the lead car, the Russian soldiers on duty leapt to attention, while 4 Afghan conscripts manhandled the heavy log, which had been rolled across the road, out of the way. Giving them an airy wave of his hand, such as seemed appropriate for a dashing paratroop commander, the Eagle sailed past. "Very good," said Major Hahn. "We'll make a soldier of you yet, Adam." "Nice of you to say so, Major. I always was good at amateur theatricals. How far are we from the port now?" Adam checked the striped T-shirt which the paratroopers wore under their jackets. The Major looked at his watch. 5 minutes to sunset, 5 minutes to the main gate of the harbour. It was a pity, Adam thought, that they weren't going into action in full daylight. Their vehicles and uniforms were so impressive, it was almost a waste. As for the faces of the men, the Soviet army itself was composed of conscripts of such diverse origins that the Afghans looked appropriately miscellaneous. He only hoped that none of the personnel carriers would break down. They had no recovery vehicles, spares, or equipment to service them. Another roadblock loomed in the distance. This one was more professional, with 2 sentry boxes, flood lamps already on, a portable generator thumping, and twin Afghan and Soviet flags hanging limply in the airless gloaming. "Stoi! Halt!" A tall, slim, and elegant lieutenant stepped carefully into the road and raised one arm, in a textbook version of an officer stopping an advancing convoy for identification purposes. Adam flashed his headlights in acknowledgement and came to a stop. The Russian NCOs at the barrier were, unusually, neither lounging nor smoking. They stood alert, obviously annoyed at the presence of this young sprout, who nevertheless outranked them. The lieutenant's boots gleamed in the scout car's headlamps as he pranced up to the vehicle. He looked as if he was going to speak to Adam, who hardly knew a word of Russian. Before he reached the driver's side, Colonel Yusuf Azambai stood up in his seat and roared, in his best regimental manner, "Get off the road, Gospodin Lieutenant, while these sons of animals let us through, will you?" The lieutenant stopped and stood stock still. To Adam, he seemed on the point of unslinging his Kalashnikov, but perhaps it was his imagination. Then Azambai shouted, "I am Colonel Majdurov, the commandeer of this special force, 105th Guards Airborne Division on special duty, and I am in a hurry." The lieutenant saluted. "That's better, Lieutenant. The Guards like a keen man." Azambai thought that the best thing to do was to keep talking. The lieutenant came up to him. "What's your name and unit?" Azambai asked imperiously. "Fedorov, Lieutenant, 360th Motorized Rifle Division, reporting, Господин Colonel." "I see. That's General Melekbekov's lot, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." Azambai smiled. "I know him well." He had, in his Red Army days, actually met the aristocratic Melekbekov, the Azerbaijani terror who lived like a prince in the USSR. "You are the fellows who did some good work over in Wardak province, didn't you? Seen a bit of action, I suppose? Of course, we have been punishing the badmashes ourselves down Khyber way." "Yes, sir. No, sir, I wasn't there. I have only just been posted here. I am a replacement." "Well, Fedorov, you did well to stop us. But you don't think we're bandits, do you? Get your men off the road, because I want to get this special job over so the men can get a little kasha, gruel. We haven't had anything all day." Fedorov was nearly ready to open the barrier. His brow wrinkled slightly as if he was wondering how to ask for movement orders from this elegant senior officer of paratroops, guardsman at that. Better keep talking, thought Azambai. "Pickled herrings, sardines and cheese, that's all I've had myself since yesterday. Something to do with this new chemical defense affair our task is. You know all about that, I suppose?" "Not exactly, sir." "Well, you do now, I take it, that there is a chemical defense unit stationed down the road at Kunduz." Chemical defense usually meant gas attack. "Yes, of course, Господин Colonel." "That's where we have been. Then old General Tyrov, he's my uncle, got it into his head that we should do a special exercise. Slip in to fool about here, protect this gunboat you've got up at the port. What's it called?" "It is called the Jihun, Colonel," shouted Major Hahn in his most military voice from the back of the scout car. His Russian was good enough, and he thought that he could lend some verisimilitude to the proceedings. "That's what it says on the orders, but we're running behind time. I don't know what the general's going to say." "Yes, we'd better be getting a move on. Can't stay here gossiping all day. I'll tell the general you assisted us, Fedorov. Every little helps, eh?" Yes, Commandeer. Many thanks." The young officer turned to his men, waving to them to remove the barrier. "Bistro, hurry!" "Spasiba, Lieutenant, thank you." The major acknowledged the salute. They were through. Only the dock gates to deal with now. It was already getting dark. The dock gates loomed, large, new, made of steel bars festooned with barbed wire. The car stopped on the shiny new asphalt, extensively floodlit with carbon arcs. The armoured personnel carriers drew up in line behind. Colonel Azambai, accompanied by Adam, jumped down from the car and strode across to the guardhouse. Outside was a large notice, red lettering on white. "The Shipping Administration of Central Asia. Headquarters at Charjui." Charjui was in the USSR. The Russians were behaving as if this Afghan port was already in their own territory. Inside the hut, sitting beside a large samovar which they were feeding with charcoal chips, were 2 Russian sergeants. They stood and came to attention when they saw the officers. "Colonel Majdurov and unit on a special mission for the gunboat Jihun. I am in a hurry, Sergeant." The older sergeant, a middle-aged man with jackboots which some first-year conscript had undoubtedly spent a long time polishing, clicked his heels. "Document?" he said. Documents. Well, there was no movement order. Best to try the airborne pass. Azambai reached into his pocket and took out the red booklet with its gold hammer and sickle embossed on the front. There you are, my man. Urgent chemical defense work, the Jihun. Spasiba, thank you. The sergeant glanced at it and saw the guard's badge on the Turkestani's right breast. He clicked his heels again and pressed a button. The gates are open now, Gospodin Colonel. Carefully obeying the sign which said maximum speed 10 kilometers per hour, the convoy rolled along the concrete surface of the broad roadway to the docks. This was the old part of the port, just a small jetty, and suddenly there she was, the Jihun, tied up fore and aft. The gunboat was brightly lit by floodlights and lying low in the water, obviously heavily laden. She looked dirty, rusty, had undoubtedly seen better days. A sergeant who had been lolling on a pile of sacks stood up in the glare of the headlights. Azambai got out of the car and went up to the man as he snapped to attention. Who are you? Sergeant Bichak, beg to report, sir. Good. Now, Sergeant, we're here on a special mission, as you must realize. Chemical defense exercise. Who is on guard and who's on board, and what are your orders? Gospodin Colonel, on shore, myself, 10 men in that hut, he indicated a guard hut some 20 feet away, and a special detachment on the ship, nobody to go on board without a permit. He spoke with a Tatar accent. And quite right too. Make sure that you don't let anyone at all, on board. Now I'm cancelling the order about the permit on my own authority. That means that nobody else, even with a permit, may go on board. Danger of chemical contamination, toxic agents, chimicheskoi or rougier. And confine your men for safety to that hut. That is imperative, understand? Understood, sir. Now, Sergeant, what other ships are in dock here? None, Gospodin Colonel. The Jihun is isolated at this wharf. Orders from GHQ. Good. Who and where are the men on board? They are a detachment from the intelligence section of KGB troops, sir. Captain Nazarov, Lieutenant Gritkin, and 28 men, 7 of them sergeants, on this watch. I don't know exactly where they are. The officers allocate the guard duties. When is your watch over, Sergeant? Same as theirs, sir. 2 a.m. At that moment, a Red Army officer in camouflage overjacket came out of the wheelhouse and stepped to the rails, 15 feet above them. He peered into the pools of light and darkness caused by the floodlights mounted high on the boat. The rumbling of the armoured vehicles must have alerted him. He was wearing a steel helmet and carried one of the new Kalashnikov 74s. He levelled it at the pair as soon as his eyes became accustomed to the light and shade pattern on the dockside. Hands up! Attack is the best defence, thought Azambai. He called out, Comrade officer, how do you like it here? In as jolly a voice as he could manage, though his throat was dry. Who are you? What do you want? The officer levelled the gun, sighting it straight at the Turkestani. I'm Colonel Majdurov, 105th Guards Airborne, Special Duty, Chemical Defense, Azambai called. Are you Nazarov or Gritkin? I'm Lieutenant Gritkin, sir. You'd better come aboard and be identified. I'm on special duty too. As the Colonel knows, this is a high-security matter. Azambai held up his red and gold booklet. Here you are, Lieutenant. This should be enough for you. Not enough, I'm afraid, Colonel. He sounded old for a lieutenant, probably promoted from the ranks. Such men were often difficult, sticking to the letter. Their general aim was, of course, to exercise whatever power they could, paying people back for all those slaps as rankers, and he was, after all, a KGB soldier, not an ordinary army man. I'm not a bandit, you know, Lieutenant. No, Gospodin Colonel, of course not. Advance and be recognized. Now Gritkin had been joined by 3 more figures, sergeants by the look of them. There was nothing for it. Azambai would have to go aboard. "All right, Gritkin, I'm coming." Azambai signalled to Major Han to stay where he was, beside the guard sergeant, and covered the length of the gangway in 3 or 4 leaps. Up a flight of iron steps, then another, and he was on the bridge deck, holding out his identity book. The lieutenant saluted and took it, looking back and forth between Azambai's face and the photograph on the document. Then he said, "That seems to be an order, sir," handing it back. "And now may I see your written instructions?" "For what?" Azambai raised his eyebrows. "For boarding this ship. The shore guard must have told you. From Stadtkvartiere, headquarters." "There never is anything in writing concerning chemical defense matters. You should know that, Lieutenant." Azambai put an edge into his voice. He sensed the suspicion of the 3 sergeants who were moving closer. Surely they wouldn't dare to defy a full colonel. Poison gas warfare was a crime, and the Russians never admitted to having any more than defense measures for gas. In reality, the Red Army had plenty of gas. "There is nothing written down about the nature of warfare, Colonel," said Gritkin, his Ukrainian accent becoming more pronounced with strain or emotion. "But there is always some authorization in general terms, such as, this person may board the Jihun for such and such a defensive purpose. That is what I want. State security demands it. Spravka, proof that your mission is authorized. You should know that already." That seemed to be that. Gritkin was so suspicious that the Major knew that he could never shift him with mere bluster. He mentally rifled through the possibilities, his mind working at top speed. Shoot all 4 Russians? No, that would bring the house down. Explain? No, that would look bad. He said, "We're guards and paratroops and a special reconnaissance group, Gritkin. That means we're unorthodox. Personal verbal orders from General Tyrov. We have to provide chemical defense for this ship." The other man was unimpressed. "Yes, Colonel." He couldn't be faulted. He stood straight, shoulders back like the good NCO he had probably once been, heels together. He was not being insolent or incorrect to any degree, merely doing his duty. "Yes, Gritkin. Now, have you a radio on this boat?" "We are not allowed to use the radio except in emergencies and for raising the alarm, for instance, in case of theft." Azambai managed to chuckle, though he felt more like grinding his teeth. "Stealing, yes. Running off with old lifebelts, I suppose." "I'm not talking about Blatt, Colonel." He was hinting that there was something more here than the small-time thievery which everyone in the Soviet forces knew about and practiced to some extent. He stopped talking abruptly. He obviously knew about the gold. He had now almost suggested that this was a plot to seize it. He'd be shot if that happened. Azambai reflected that the KGB had been clever. The NCOs on the gates, and probably those in the hut too, almost certainly knew nothing at all about the treasure in the ship. That was the way to keep security. They even had a fairly light guard on it. But Gritkin and his sergeants were a different matter. "And I am talking about protecting your ship against Blatt or anything else, Lieutenant. Blatt is as much an anti-state activity as anything else." Let the lieutenant think that he was a priest at heart, if that would help. "If you can't use your radio, use mine." He'd just had a brainwave. "I'm not allowed to leave the ship until relieved. That would be irregular." "Lieutenant, if your superior, Captain Nazarov, isn't it, is awake, tell him that Colonel Majdurov would be glad to have a word with him." He turned his back ostentatiously and looked as incuriously as he could down onto the quay. As if relieved at the decision, Gritkin was away and back in a moment with a tall, thin, slightly drunken captain, smelling of vodka and smoothing his field uniform shirt. He came to attention when he saw the colonel. Azambai explained the situation. The captain was impressed. "Yes, Colonel, of course. Come with me to the saloon and have a drink. Gritkin can go and verify things on your radio, and I am sure that all will be in order." He seemed apprehensive, aware that he was not quite sober, and afraid that the colonel would report him. That would not do. Azambai would have to go with him or the trick wouldn't work. He thought fast. "Thank you, Captain, but I'll have to take Gritkin down to the quay myself. My radio operator will not accept any orders without me. That's the way we do things in the airborne." He gave an arch smile to indicate his pride in the endearing little ways of his lads, doing their duty to the letter. The captain saluted. "Certainly, Colonel. I'll await your return. I'll have the vodka ready. It's the best." Together, Azambai and Gritkin went down to where the APCs stood, silently, full of very tense men, waiting for something to happen. Azambai knocked on the turret of the first carrier. Zelikov opened it and looked out. "Gospodin Colonel?" "Captain Gritkin, from the gunboat," Azambai said in his best, clipped military Russian. "Wants to verify our orders, Sergeant." He turned to the captain. "From whom do you want the authorization, Gritkin?" "From Movement Control, North Command." "Yes, of course, that's the best. Everything should be filed with them." Azambai was sweating, even in the cold night air, but thinking fast. "Sergeant, raise Movement Control. You will remember that on our high-security network, it has the prefix uksus, vinegar." Zelikov was quick on the uptake. "At once, Gospodin Colonel." He remembered that vinegar was the call sign for the third personnel carrier in their convoy. "Right then, I'll leave you to it." Azambai moved away slowly out of Gritkin's line of vision, then sprang rather than walked the 50 feet or so to the third APC, tapping on the turret as he came level with it. "When you get a message in the next few seconds in Russian from a Nikolai, just say, 'Wait, please, we're checking,'" he told the radio man. The man nodded. He was one of the best Russian speakers among the Turkestanis. That was why Azambai had chosen his vehicle. It seemed like only a second before the radio squawked, with Zelikov's voice asking for movement control for transport information. The Turkestani replied with the answer he had been told to give and put the caller on hold. Azambai then spoke rapidly. "When Lieutenant Gritkin comes on, say that our visit is authorized at the highest level, but that it is highly secret and he is to give us all cooperation." Within 3 minutes, it was done. Azambai walked back to the slightly chastened Gritkin and fell into step beside him as they made their way back to the ship. "Well done, Lieutenant. I like a man with zeal. Let's have that vodka out now, shall we?" When they rejoined Captain Nazarov, Azambai underlined the importance of his work by refusing a drink. "Gentlemen," he said, "I have things to do for my homeland. I cannot drink." After a few quick shots of vodka, bought from Moscow's best liquor store, 4 Gorky Street, the captain staggered off, and Azambai explained that he and his men would have to be given a free hand to set up their chemical protection system on board the Jihun. Gritkin, very politely, borrowed his forged airborne pass, photographed it with a Polaroid camera, and locked the print in a flat grey box marked Altın Kush. Altın Kush in Turkic languages meant golden bird. Adam posted 2 personnel carriers side on, with their gun ports facing inland, near the dock gates to discourage visitors. He also arranged for one of his Russian-speaking sergeants to sit with the Soviet guards in case of problems. Then the rest of the men started to carry the gelignite boxes on board the Jihun. Louis Palmer's days as a shipwright had not been wasted. One look at the battered gunboat and he recognized it as a type which had been popular for prestige among second-rate rulers in the 19th century. It would be very vulnerable to modern explosives. 40 years ago, it had been brought in pieces across the Caspian Sea to Krasnovodsk, and thence shipped overland and down the Oxus River to be sold to the Afghan government. Even then, it had been almost a museum piece. Palmer and his group set the charges and primed them, while Adam, with Kasim and Zelikov, wandered through the gloomy, foul-smelling bowels of the ship, looking for the gold. First, they found the guards, playing card games, cleaning their weapons or brewing tea in the large second-class saloon aft. Forward were the two officers, one drunk, the other satisfied that he had no special responsibilities until the change of watch, studying for promotion examinations. But where was the treasure? Kasim had just stubbed his toe on a projecting board in the floor of the main cargo hold, which seemed very small and low, when he realized that the whole floor was composed of wooden boxes. He was actually standing on the cargo, which filled half of the total height of the hold. Kasim hissed to attract Adam's attention. When he came over, Kasim asked, "What does 30 noto mean, Adam?" "I don't know. Why?" "There are dozens or hundreds of boxes here. They've all got that stenciled on them." Zelikov crept up to them. "That not 30 noto. That zolata, Russian word, Cyrillic alphabet, means gold. This is it, gospodin." Adam went over to where Azambai was conversing in a low voice with Palmer about something to do with detonating the gelignite. "Yusuf, we found the gold. Tons of it. Let's get it out instead of blowing it up." "You must be crazy. Something could happen at any moment. We got on board and we've got the explosives set. Now for goodness sake, let's get out while we're still alive. Suppose they see us taking things away from the ship. Bringing stuff on board, after all, isn't the same thing." He didn't feel like a hero, somehow, at that moment. "I'm going to do it, Yusuf. Say what you like. We could use that money to buy arms, to look after the wounded, to get proper medical attention. People are dying from starvation and lack of medicines." Azambai paused, then shook the eagle's hand. "You're right, Adam. I'm with you." The boxes were not very heavy. They weighed about 20 pounds each, and their tops were nailed down. "I estimate," whispered Adam, "that there must be about 1,000 mohurs in each box. 10 boxes and we'll have $1.5 million. 100 boxes would be $15 million. $15 million. 10 million pounds sterling. 32 million Swiss francs. Stuck in the bowels of an ancient gunboat full of KGB men, guarded by the Soviet army a stone's throw from the USSR. However plausible the story of this chemical warfare unit might have been, Adam knew that the tale wouldn't cover the theft of the gold. "Excuse me, Gritkin, we're just carrying this treasure away to decontaminate it." A bluff. That's what he needed. Something that would enable his men to get the boxes onto the quay, into the personnel carriers, and away. Not while all those Russians were watching, surely. Of course not. Quickly, Adam surveyed the rubbish in the hold and saw a drum of worn electric cable. Not far away, there was a pile of old rubber sponges. He stabbed a hole through the center of a handful of these and threaded them onto the cable. Azambai looked on in amazement. "Have you gone crazy?" Adam quickly explained. "There are 7 Russian sergeants in the saloon aft. Round them up and tell them that we need help from responsible people for part of our work. Say it'll only take a few moments, but get them all into the forward saloon." "You think they'll fall for that?" Azambai's eyes were wide with amazement. "Better men than them have fallen for it. You see, you know what's happening and they don't. In that situation, people will do almost anything they're told. Gritkin probably won't be so easily fooled, and we can only hope he's too busy to leave his office. The captain's too drunk to bother, wouldn't even notice an air raid." Adam sent Zelikov to brief his men in the personnel carriers. Each man was to walk to the gangway and descend to the hold. Then, like robots working in perfect sequence, the guerrillas were to shoulder the boxes and ferry them to the deck, from there to the gangway, and then to the vehicles. Very rapidly. Not one step missed, not one moment lost. When Adam got to the forward saloon, he found Azambai there, surrounded by Russians, all looking attentively at what he was doing. "Chemical protection," he was explaining, "has to be very carefully calculated, with reference to local background humidity." He shook the flex, with its dirty bits of sponge dangling, like an illustration of how to use a washing line. The Russians nodded their understanding. "Now," Yusuf Azambai continued, "if you will just hold this end." In a moment he had the 7 sergeants holding the flex tightly against the panelling. He made them move until they were equally spaced around the saloon. "Note carefully and with complete attention. The cable must be taut and the sponges must be in contact with the wall." "That's fine, you're learning. It needs only a few minutes for the rubber indicators to absorb moisture. I'll be right back with the electronic meter to take a reading. I'm most grateful to you all. No, don't let it sag. Fine." Azambai was now at the door. Together he and Adam slipped away. The two raced up the companionway and across the deck to see the last of the gold porters disappearing into the darkness of the quay beyond the floodlights. 15 million American dollars, Adam thought, as the alarm klaxons started to blare.